What if one of the most widely read, most influential books of the last century was, well, from a critical standpoint, a profound failure?
It's a really provocative thought, isn't it? Challenges how we think about success and impact.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into Ayn Rand's huge novel, Atlas Shrugged, published back in '57. I mean, this thing is massive.
Oh, it is. 188 pages. It wasn't just a story for her. Rand saw it as her magnum opus, blending fiction with her whole philosophy.
Right. And that's what makes it so interesting to pull apart.
Mm-hmm. Our mission today is really to explore why this book, which has had such a huge cultural life, gets such, frankly, negative reactions from literary and philosophical critics.
Okay.
It's structured, interestingly, in 3 parts, named after Aristotle's laws of logic, non-contradiction, either or, and A is A. We're going to look into the professional critiques, but importantly, without giving away any major plot points.
Good plan. No spoilers. And just so you know, you are experiencing a unique 2-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM, which allows us to get into some really deep dynamic analysis.
Okay, so where do we start? The narrative itself.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah.
The basic story follows Dagny Taggart, a railroad executive, and Hank Reardon, a steel guy. They're facing this world where the top minds, the most productive people, are just disappearing.
Vanishing, yeah.
And this leads to the big reveal of John Galt's Strike of the Mind, where these elites basically just walk away.
It's quite a hook, you know?
Right.
It uses some elements of detective fiction early on, trying to figure out the mystery.
Right.
But, and this is crucial, that whole structure eventually leads up to this massive 70-page radio speech by John Galt.
70 pages. Wow.
Yeah. And for a lot of critics, that's the point where it stops feeling like a novel and becomes something else. Whittaker Chambers famously called it a massive tract for the times, not really literature in the traditional sense.
A tract. I get that. It sounds less like storytelling and more like, well, a manifesto slipped into a story.
Pretty much. Which brings us right to the writing itself, the prose style.
Yeah, the critics weren't kind there, were they? I've seen descriptions like breathless hyperbole of soap opera.
That's a common one. And situations being incredible and illogical.
So what does that actually do to the reading experience? Does it just make it feel fake?
It creates this feeling of excessive melodrama. It's like instead of subtle character growth or plot development, you get these huge dramatic pronouncements and events that strain belief.
Okay.
And there's also what critics call didactic intrusion. The philosophy lectures just keep breaking in.
So the message overrides the story.
Constantly. It feels like the author's pausing the action to say, now here's the lesson. Ideology over art, basically. And honestly, the structure is quite repetitive, too. Points get made again and again.
So the melodrama isn't even serving the story well. It's just there. And it sounds like this lack of subtlety carries over to the characters, too. Rand called them stylized, but critics say they're more like symbols.
Exactly. Philosophical archetypes rather than, believable people. You end up with this very black and white world.
How so?
Well, you've got the producers, Dagny, Reardon, Galt. They embody all the objectivist virtues almost perfectly, like superhumanly rational and productive.
The good guys.
Right. Then you have the looters, government folks, collectivists. They're basically all bad. Incompetent, malicious, no redeeming qualities shown.
And anyone in between.
That's the mixed. They get a choice. Become heroic like the producers or slide into being a looter. There's no middle ground, really.
So no complexity, no moral gray areas.
None to speak of. It completely strips out psychological depth, internal conflict, the messy stuff that makes characters feel real. That's why critics call them wooden puppets. They just act out their assigned ideological roles.
It sounds like they wouldn't be much fun at a dinner party.
Probably not, unless you wanted a lecture on logic.
Which brings us back to those lectures, especially Galt's huge speech. If the characters are puppets, these speeches must feel incredibly heavy, right? Do they just stop the story dead?
They pretty much do, yeah. Critics point out a lot of weaknesses there, often poor logical construction, arguments that are fallacious or based on unsupported claims presented as fact. They also rely heavily on straw man arguments, misrepresenting opposing views to make them easier to knock down.
Instead of tackling the real argument.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like you said, the sheer excessive length just swamps the story. It feels less like a novel and more like a philosophy text wearing a novel's costume.
Okay, so let's dig into that philosophy itself, objectivism. What are the core ideas Rand is pushing in the book?
Well, the main tenets presented are: reason is our basic tool for survival, rational self-interest is the highest moral purpose, and reality, objective reality, is absolute. A is A, as the third part's title says.
Right. Reason, selfishness, reality.
But critics find some major holes in this, especially the ethical egoism part. How does it actually work in society? There's the interaction problem.
Okay, what's that?
If everyone acts purely in their own rational self-interest, how do you get stable cooperation? Interests are bound to clash eventually. Rand doesn't really show how you resolve that without some sense of duty to others, even a minimal one. It assumes a kind of automatic harmony that critics find unrealistic.
That's a big assumption.
Yeah.
Society needs cooperation. What about people who can't be fully self-sufficient? Children, the sick, the elderly.
And that's the dependency issue. It's a huge blind spot for critics. Human life involves dependency. Rand's system doesn't offer a strong reason, beyond maybe personal preference, for the strong to help the vulnerable. It makes the philosophy seem, well, unworkable for actual human communities.
Doesn't sound very practical.
And then there's a more technical philosophical issue, the naturalistic fallacy, trying to jump from describing how things are or how Rand thinks they are, like humans being rational egoists, to how they ought to be, without a clear logical bridge. Just because something exists doesn't automatically make it morally right.
So, logical leaves some practical problems. What about how the book handles knowledge itself? Epistemology.
More issues there, according to critics. There's a noted rejection of symbolic logic, the modern tools philosophers use for rigorous argument analysis. Rand didn't engage with it. Her theory of how we form concepts is seen as having an inadequate treatment, not really explaining the complexities of human knowledge, and maybe most damningly, instances of circular reasoning, arguing in a circle, where your conclusion is already assumed in your starting point, like saying, my philosophy is right because it's based on reason. Reason shows my philosophy is right. It doesn't actually prove anything.
It all sounds very absolute.
Yeah.
And that division between producers and looters, you mentioned it being binary. Is that a major criticism too? The lack of nuance?
Oh, absolutely. These false dichotomies, presenting complex issues as simple either choices, are a core problem. Producer or looter, selfishness or self-sacrifice, capitalism or collectivist doom.
No room for mixed motives or complex systems.
Very little. It strips out all the messy middle ground where most real life happens. Critics argue this makes the moral framework simplistic and ultimately not very useful for navigating the real world's complexities. It's just too black and white.
Okay, this is a lot to unpack. Before we get into how this critically questioned book became so popular, let's pause for a second. If you're finding this analysis interesting and want to explore visual breakdowns of text like this, you might want to check out Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel, also offering AI book analysis aimed at sparking reflection and, well, rational thought.
Good point. It's useful to see these things visually sometimes.
Definitely. Now, back to Atlas Shrugged. Given all these criticisms we've discussed, how was it actually received when it first came out in 1957?
Oof. The reviews were brutal. I mean, overwhelmingly negative, is putting it mildly.
Really? Like what?
Well, you had Whittaker Chambers, again, in the National Review. He called the tone one of overriding arrogance, and then there was that infamous line, warning that from almost any page of Atlas Shrugged, a voice can be heard, from painful necessity commanding, to a gas chamber go.
Wow, that's incredibly strong language.
It really was. Granville Hicks in the New York Times said it was not in any literary sense a serious novel, and that it basically howls in the reader's ear.
Howls.
Yeah. And Robert Kirsch in the LA Times called it probably the worst piece of large fiction written since Miss Rand's equally weighty The Fountainhead. So, yeah, not exactly critical acclaim.
Okay, so the critics hated it, but the book sold millions. It's still incredibly popular in certain circles. How do you square that, this massive disconnect between critical failure and popular success?
It's a great question, and there are a few key reasons, I think. First, undeniable ideological appeal. It hit a nerve, especially during the Cold War. It offered a powerful, unapologetic defense of individualism and capitalism that resonated with many people feeling anxious about collectivism.
So it met a need for a certain audience.
Definitely. Second, the simplified worldview itself was appealing. Life is complicated. This book offered clear heroes, clear villains, and seemingly straightforward answers. That kind of certainty can be very attractive.
Black and white is easier than gray.
Exactly. And third, the cultural timing. Its anti-government, anti-collectivist message landed perfectly in the Cold War context. It felt relevant, urgent.
Right place, right time, right message for some, which explains its lasting influence, particularly with libertarians and conservatives.
Yes, but that influence, critics would argue, comes more from its ideological utility. its usefulness as a political or economic argument than from any inherent literary or philosophical strength. It serves a purpose for a particular viewpoint.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together then. A summary of the main critiques on the literary side.
It's a long list, excessive length without enough actual development. Philosophy crammed in clumsily, repetitive scenes, over-the-top, melodramatic writing.
Unrealistic dialogue.
Right, dialogue that serves the ideology, not the characters,
Right.
heavy-handed symbols, and those characters one-dimensional, lacking psychological depth, just acting out roles in a strict good versus evil play.
And the philosophical side. What are the core weaknesses critics nail down?
Logical problems are central. Inconsistencies, arguments built on shaky or unproven foundations, circular reasoning, a lack of solid evidence for its big claims about human nature.
And practical issues too.
Big time. It struggles to explain basic social cooperation, can't really account for dependency or altruism in a convincing way, and critics see a kind of elitism in how it dismisses the worth of ordinary people.
So if we look at the ideal society Rand seems to envision in the book, does that hold up to scrutiny, practically speaking?
Not according to critics, no. There's what you could call economic naivety. It seems to ignore real-world market failures, things like pollution costs or monopolies, or the fact that buyers and sellers don't always have the same information. It assumes a perfect competition that just doesn't exist. And it doesn't really grapple with inequality at all.
Okay, so economically unrealistic, politically.
Similar issues. Political unrealism. A very simplistic view of government as purely obstructive. It ignores situations where collective action is necessary to solve problems, like managing shared resources. It assumes individuals can just voluntarily solve everything.
Then socially.
Social blindness, perhaps. It downplays cooperation, mutual aid, the fact that we're all interdependent. It overlooks how institutions and culture shape us, acting as if pure, isolated self-interest is the only real driver.
So, wrapping it all up, the critical consensus seems to be
that Atlas Shrugged is basically a failed experiment. It doesn't quite work as literature or as serious philosophy. Its popularity is really about its potent ideological message, not its quality as a novel or a reasoned argument.
it provides a kind of justification, maybe.
That's what critics suggest, a justification for prioritizing self-interest and dismissing social obligations. It offers a simple, stark worldview. But if you're looking for nuanced thinking on individualism, capitalism, ethics, you'd probably be better served elsewhere. It's more of a historical artifact now, a cultural marker.
A very influential artifact, though.
Undeniably. And, putting together this kind of analysis, we've been guided by a pretty systematic critique framework, making sure we cover all these different angles, literary, philosophical, practical.
Right, trying to be thorough. Which leads to maybe a final thought for everyone listening. What does it really mean for our culture when a book that faces such deep, fundamental criticism can still have such enormous and lasting influence? Something to chew on.
Definitely something to think about.
And as you do, remember you can find more discussions like this on Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, and of course here on our podcasts. We try to encourage that reflection and critical thinking. So if you want the really in-depth analysis of this book, click the link you see on screen now. And please, subscribe if you haven't. Share this with anyone you think might find it interesting. Consider purchasing the book through the link if you want to form your own opinion. And above all, keep thinking critically about the ideas you encounter.